And welcome back. As you have heard, there is an important story to be told through the journey of almost every immigrant who came to America. It's great for us when they involve family members of historians who can explain how those stories fit into the big picture. Joining me is someone who has been doing that for me in various interviews over the years. She is Connie Young Yu, an historian with the Chinese Historical Society of America. And as I mentioned before, she is also the author of The World of Our Grandmothers. Connie, thanks a lot for being here.
I'm thrilled.
Now, give us an idea. First of all, speaking of grandmothers, tell us a little bit about your personal story and your family's kind of connection to the whole Angel Island experience.
Well, my grandmother, my mother's mother, Mrs. Levi Strauss, was detained on Angel Island for 15.5 months, one of the longest days for a Chinese woman, from January 1924 through April 1925.
What were the circumstances? Why they kept her so long?
My grandmother was born in China. She was the widow of an American-born merchant, Levi Strauss, who was an agent for Levi Strauss, incidentally, and he had taken his family to be with him in China while he was working. And he died unexpectedly on board ship. He died of cancer, returning to China on one of his business trips. And my grandmother was just, of course, you know, just devastated. Right. But she said, there's no future for me here in China. I want to return with my American-born children to America. So she takes the President Cleveland, and the family is very excited to come back to America. My mother describes, you know, jumping on the boat when she saw the Golden Gate. I mean, not the bridge, but the Golden Gate at that time. Yes. And she and her sister were saying, we're home, we're home. And they were allowed to land. My grandmother, because her papers said she was born in China, she was a widow, she was not with her husband, she was detained. She was held on Angel Island.
Why is that? Why were those circumstances considered some reason to hold somebody up?
There was a new law, new immigration law of 1924 that said no alien ineligible for citizenship can be allowed to immigrate to the United States. Now, who would that alien be but a Chinese person?
But why did it take 15 months to clear that up?
Well, my grandmother appealed. Of course, everyone appealed. Sure. And then during that time she was detained, she was tested in the hospital, and she tested positive for having liver flu, which was the common condition. Oh. And they said anybody with that condition should be deported immediately. And so anyway, my mother and her sisters went to the former boss of their father, Walter Haas of Levi Strauss, and appealed for help. And he sent out his team of lawyers. But it took that long. They lost their first appeal. And then it took so long with many testimonies and going to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals and 10 telegrams to Washington, D.C., you know, to appeal her case.
What is she living like? What are her conditions during that time?
My grandmother was detained in the immigration barracks during that time. And if you've ever been to Angel Island, you know what they're barracks. And then she had to, all the meals were in the administration building. My grandmother said she could not eat the food. First of all, it's not a Chinese diet. And she was just very, very distraught, because she was, at any moment, she thought she was going to be deported. And meanwhile, my mother and her sisters could take the ferry to visit her in the administration building, but they could only visit her for 15 minutes at a time. They had to write down everything they said. My mother was treated like a prisoner. There's always somebody watching us. And if there was no matron to escort my grandmother from the barracks administration room, she could not have any visitors.
Oh, it's a good thing your mother was able to visit and document so many details here, huh?
And she would bring food. She'd bring special Chinese dishes to my grandmother, you know, and it was just, she described it as the most heartbreaking time of her life.
Having to spend so much time there, did that set a precedent, or did that change anything in terms of procedure? They couldn't have wanted to have that happen too often.
Well, one thing, this case became a precedent. My grandmother won her case thanks to the lawyers of the Haas brothers. Charles Frickert was the chief lawyer on the case, and the fact that she was allowed to land a widow, you know, ineligible for citizenship, with this condition that was cured. See, the lawyers proved that this was not a threat. They had doctors, you know, testify, and then she was treated. And after she was cured, they said, look, you know, it wasn't a threat.
So in a way, it was just an excuse.
Yes, it was an excuse. And the thing that makes our family very proud is our grandmother, through this suffering and this ordeal on Angel Island, actually set a precedent through winning her case, because it was used, her case was used in subsequent quick cases, and other people were allowed to be released from Angel Island. So
at least if she had to go through that, she set some history there, huh?
Yes, we're very proud.
And our thanks to the Levi Strauss people for helping out, huh?
Absolutely.
All right. Thank you very much for being here and telling that story. All right, well, coming up, some important events and dates to remember going on in the community, so stay with us for that.